The walls are closing in on Eric Swalwell, and that is where we begin with new reporting. Two separate investigations have been launched into the disgraced former congressman's behavior after 5 women came out accusing him of sexual misconduct, and in 2 cases, rape. Now listen to this. There have been whispers in Washington for years about his alleged misconduct. So why is this the first time we are hearing about it? Now look at this. Back in 2017, CNN reported that there was an unnamed California lawmaker who pursued at least 6 female staffers, but they never revealed who that lawmaker was because they said the stories were not verified. Now, that's fair. We do not know if that was Eric Swalwell to whom they were alluding, but why didn't CNN follow up on their own reporting? That's what any news organization would do. In that same year, just 1 month later, Politico reported that at least 20 lawmakers accused of sexual misconduct were about to be unmasked. But listen to this. They were never unmasked. We do not know their names. Why? Now, with these new allegations involving Eric Swalwell, which he denies, it raises a bigger question. If reporters, insiders, political circles were hearing things back then, why didn't anyone do anything about it? Why didn't the media and Democrats bring it to light sooner? The California kingmaker, Willie Brown, says it's been an open secret for years, saying, quote, "I am not surprised, frankly, because there have been rumors after rumors after rumors." His colleagues in Washington pretty much said that. That's what Adam Schiff said. That's what Nancy Pelosi said. And that's from the California kingmaker. And now when asked, Democrats are openly admitting that they knew, too.
I had heard rumors that he was a womanizer, and that's one of the reasons that I endorsed Tom Steyer in the race.
What were the rumors? It was flirty. That was flirty.
And that was when? About what year was it?
I mean, that was through, we've heard that. We've heard that throughout.
I think many of us had heard the rumors as well. Never seen any corroboration, but certainly I think the word had gone out.
And just this week, a 5th accuser spoke out against Eric Swalwell. You might have seen this, detailing how he allegedly assaulted her. Now, we have to warn you before we play this, these details are disturbing. Here is Lana Drews.
I believe he drugged my drink. I only had 1 glass of wine. He said he needed to get paperwork from his hotel room. When I arrived at his hotel room, I was already incapacitated and I couldn't move my arms or my body. He raped me and he choked me. And while he was choking me, I lost consciousness. And I thought I died. My delay in taking action against Eric was driven by fear, not doubt. Fear of his political power.
Joining me now exclusively with reaction here in New York City is Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Congresswoman, this is the part of the story that I do not think has been explored. Hearing that this was an open secret, and of course, anyone is innocent until proven guilty, but had you heard this open secret? You're on the other side of the aisle.
I don't get invited to parties, so I am very lonely in Washington. I had not heard the open secret. In fact, I've never spoken to Eric Swalwell because of his politics. But here we have a guy who was protected by his party, apparently for years. They all knew about it and said nothing. The party that says they protect women actually hurt women. They protected predators instead of these women. And I want to say and thank the women who've come forward for their bravery, for their courage as a survivor. I know firsthand how difficult it must be and is for these women. They might lose their jobs. They're going to be attacked. But this is a guy that led Russiagate. This is a guy that was the attack dog on Donald Trump. I imagine they protected him, his party, because he was so effective and he was leading that effort to go after Donald Trump. And that's why they did that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, you know, of course, on the Republican side of the aisle, we saw Tony Gonzalez resign as well. So I bring that up because I want to know how widespread this is. And I saw a tweet that you said that Congress has a predator problem. It is time to clean house. Is Congress having a Me Too moment?
They are. And in fact, last fall, I brought up Tony Gonzalez in Congress privately. When I started hearing rumors about a person in my own party, I said, we need to clean up our own party, because if we're going to attack Democrats for their behavior, we have to be willing to acknowledge when we have someone that needs to be kicked out of Congress or resign. And this is just the beginning. I think there should be an avalanche of resignations. Like, women need to come forward and show who these predators are, because women that work on the Hill, they shouldn't be harassed. They shouldn't be approached this way. Shouldn't be raped or drugged. I mean, the things that were going on allegedly with Eric Swalwell and possibly Ruben Gallego and others, these predators need to resign, and they need to be exposed. And quite frankly, I don't care what party they are. I mean, I've been advocating for what is fair, what is right, what is equal for women, so they have the right opportunities like everybody else, but this is out of control. And I want every single predator that's in Congress now to be forced to resign. I don't care how long it takes. If we can do it fast, let's do it. Let's do it now, regardless of party. They gotta go.
And you've put action behind your words here. You put forward a resolution, and it said you wanted to move publicly to release records of sexual harassment investigations. I think the average person watching this says that seems fair. If there's a sexual harassment investigation in Congress, we as taxpayers paying your salary deserve to know about it.
Right.
But the vote for that was 357 to 65. How could Congress be against this? How could the House?
Well, both parties decided that they would vote against revealing the sexual harassment records of their own party. And what happens is both parties will protect the other because they don't want their skeletons out there. And so they end up protecting each other. And they lied about what the bill actually did. I protected all of the identifying information for victims and witnesses. As a survivor, I want to be sure I protected them, but they covered it up. And this was just a few weeks ago. So this avalanche of this Me Too congressional moment is huge for us, and we need to expose every single one.
Yeah, no doubt. It's an important issue. We'll continue to follow up more on it later in the hour. I do want to ask you about the big breaking news about Iran that happened yesterday. We just heard from President Trump in the Oval Office. He addressed Iran a little bit, said things were going well. But if President Trump is able to secure the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, remove the uranium, which he has indicated Iran is willing to do, stop the proxies in the ballistic missiles program, this might be the greatest deal in history and, quite frankly, reset the world order. There's a lot of ifs, but it would be a big deal.
I just texted the president about Iran, saying it was going perfectly right now. This would be peace in the Middle East, and he's the only president that I know that can pull this off and do this. He's done what no one else has attempted to do, and so far what he's done in this negotiation is nothing short of historic and remarkable and perfect right now in this moment.
So you've been communicating with the president. So it's his belief that we are on the right track.
It's my belief. I communicated that to him, and I think he knows that he's on the right track. We had no troops on the ground. That was one of my concerns early on, is making sure that we didn't have troops on the ground, and he did it without doing any of that. And I think he's the only person. I told him this morning that I think he's the only president that could pull this off, and he's done it in the last couple of days. What I have seen has just been completely historic, and that's what I told him this morning.
Yes, and we will continue to follow it. And Congresswoman, we cover faith on this show. It's a key part of Saturday in America. You had a loss this week. You lost your father, and I was very drawn to the way you described those last moments. We've covered near-death experiences on the show, and it is firmly my belief that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And you said, as heartbroken as I am tonight, on the night you lost your father, today showed me God is real. Today unfolded exactly as he intended. Would you share with us that moment?
It was just miracle after miracle on the day that my father passed away. He accepted Christ in the last few days of his life, which to me was a big deal because I was saved about 7 years ago. But I saw God's hand. He died on the day that his grandson, who most looked like him, who favored him, was an Army infantry ranger. The family was there. He wanted his wife and dogs with him. We had the dogs on our lap, and we prayed the Lord's Prayer over him as he passed away. And he passed away knowing that he was a war hero. He saved many men's lives in Vietnam and other conflicts. And he died knowing that Jesus loved him. And his faith was there, and his family was there. And as horrible as this moment and awful and heartbroken as we are, it was perfectly molded the way that God created it, the way that God intended to. And as he was passing away, I was reading him stories of his heroism in Vietnam. And that's what calmed him down. He died knowing he was a war hero, that Jesus loved him, and that he would meet God in the end. And it was an incredible moment, and it renewed my faith. And it said to me that this is exactly what was supposed to happen. It renewed my faith in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and he accepted Christ on a Friday, and then days later went to go be with his Lord and Savior. Beautiful.
Yeah,
thank you
it was
for
a miracle.
sharing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. What a hero, and thank you to your family
Thank
for
you, and
your
God
service.
bless you.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.